The blood was still fresh on her hands when Rebecca Turner stumbled into the dusty streets of Lewiston, Idaho, her dress torn and her face streaked with dirt and tears. It was the summer of 1878, and the small frontier town was just beginning to stir in the early morning light, the air already warm with the promise of another scorching day. She had walked through the night, leaving behind the burning remains of her family's homestead and the bodies of her parents, killed by a gang of outlaws who had swept through looking for money that did not exist. Rebecca was 22 years old, an orphan now, with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to survive. She collapsed near the water trough outside the general store, her legs finally giving out beneath her. The wooden planks of the sidewalk were rough against her knees, but she barely felt the scrape. Her mind was still trapped in the nightmare of the previous night, hearing her mother's screams, seeing her father try to fight back with nothing but his bare hands. The outlaws had laughed as they shot him down. They had taken everything, set fire to the modest cabin, and ridden off into the darkness while Rebecca hid in the root cellar, too terrified to move until the silence became unbearable. A shadow fell across her, and she looked up to see a tall man standing there, his silhouette dark against the rising sun. He wore a dusty hat pulled low over his eyes, and his clothes marked him as a working cowboy, someone who spent his days on horseback, tending cattle and mending fences. His face was weathered but kind, with lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. "Madam," he said, his voice deep and gentle. "You hurt?" Rebecca tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. She shook her head, then nodded, then shook it again, unable to find the words to explain what had happened. The man crouched down beside her, moving slowly so as not to startle her, and offered her his canteen. She took it with trembling hands and drank deeply, the water cool and clean, washing away some of the ash and smoke that seemed to coat her throat. "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "Name is Blake Garrett," he said. "I work at the Double R Ranch just outside town." "You look like you have been through hell itself." "They killed them," Rebecca said, the words tumbling out now. "The outlaws came last night. They killed my parents. They burned everything." Blake's expression hardened, his jaw tightening. "Where was this?" "About 10 miles north, near Tammany Creek, the Turner homestead." She looked down at her hands, still stained with blood from where she had tried to pull her father inside before the fire spread. "I am all that is left." Blake stood up and looked around the street, which was beginning to fill with people going about their morning business. "We need to get you somewhere safe, get you cleaned up. Then I am going to ride out there and see what can be done." "There is nothing to be done," Rebecca said bitterly. "They are gone, the house is gone, everything is gone." "Maybe so," Blake said, extending his hand to help her up, "but you are still here and that means something." Rebecca hesitated, then took his hand. His grip was strong and steady, and when he pulled her to her feet, she felt a spark of something she could not quite name. Hope, perhaps, or just the simple human need for kindness after such brutality. She swayed slightly, and Blake steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Come on," he said. "Mrs. Henderson runs a boarding house a few streets over. She will take you in and get you sorted out." Rebecca let him guide her through the town, her legs moving automatically while her mind tried to process everything that had happened. Lewiston was a modest place, with wooden buildings lining the main street and the smell of wood smoke and horse manure thick in the air. People turned to stare as they passed, their eyes taking in Rebecca's disheveled appearance and Blake's protective stance beside her. She knew she must look like a wild thing, half dead and covered in ash, but she could not bring herself to care. Mrs. Henderson was a stout woman with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that missed nothing. She took one look at Rebecca and immediately ushered her inside, clucking her tongue and muttering about the state of the world. Blake explained what had happened in low tones while Mrs. Henderson filled a basin with warm water and found some clean clothes that had belonged to her daughter before she married and moved away. "You poor dear," Mrs. Henderson said, her voice full of genuine sympathy. "You just sit here and let me help you clean up. Blake, you go do what needs doing." Blake nodded and turned to leave, but Rebecca called out to him. "Wait." He paused in the doorway, his hat in his hands, and looked back at her. The morning light streaming through the window illuminated his face, and Rebecca could see the concern in his blue eyes, the set of his shoulders that suggested he was ready to ride out and hunt down the men who had done this. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. "You do not even know me." Blake was quiet for a moment, turning his hat in his hands. "Out here, we look after each other. That is just how it is. Besides, nobody deserves what happened to you. What do you want from me?" The question came out more harshly than she intended, but Rebecca had learned young that nothing in life was free, that every kindness came with a price. Blake met her eyes steadily. "Just a chance to help," he said simply. "Nothing more than that." Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden floor as he left. Rebecca sat there, feeling Mrs. Henderson's gentle hands cleaning the dirt and blood from her face, and wondered if she could trust this stranger who had appeared when she needed help most. In her experience, men always wanted something, always had ulterior motives. But there had been something in Blake's eyes, a sincerity that was hard to fake. Over the next few hours, Mrs. Henderson worked quietly, helping Rebecca wash and dress in clean clothes, braiding her long auburn hair and sitting her down with a plate of eggs and biscuits that Rebecca could barely force herself to eat. The food tasted like ash in her mouth, but she knew she needed to keep her strength up. She had no idea what came next, how she would survive without her family, without her home. Blake returned late in the afternoon, his face grim. He found Rebecca sitting on the porch of the boarding house, staring out at the street without really seeing it. He sat down beside her, a respectful distance away, and removed his hat. "I rode out to your place," he said quietly. "I am sorry, but there is nothing left. The cabin burned to the ground. I buried your parents properly, said some words over them. It is not much, but it is something." Rebecca felt tears sting her eyes, but she blinked them back. She had cried enough. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "That was kind of you. Did you get a good look at the men who did this?" Blake asked. Rebecca shook her head. "It was dark. There were 4 of them, maybe 5. One had a scar on his face, I think, but I was hiding. I did not see much." Blake's hands clenched into fists, and she could see the anger radiating off him. "The sheriff needs to know about this. There have been other attacks in the area, other homesteads hit. This gang is getting bolder." "What good will it do?" Rebecca asked bitterly. "They will be long gone by now." "Maybe," Blake acknowledged, "but we still have to try." They went to see Sheriff Coleman together, and Rebecca told her story again, though the words came easier this time, as if by repeating them she could somehow distance herself from the horror of what had happened. The sheriff was a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and tired eyes, and he listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions. He promised to put together a posse and track the gang, but Rebecca could see in his face that he did not hold out much hope of catching them. When they left the sheriff's office, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Blake walked Rebecca back to the boarding house, and at the door, she turned to face him. "You have done so much for me already," she said. "I do not know how to repay you." "You do not owe me anything," Blake said firmly. "I just want to make sure you are safe." "Why?" Rebecca asked again, needing to understand. "Why do you care what happens to me?" Blake looked down at his boots, then back up at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "My sister," he said quietly. 5 years ago, she was traveling to meet her husband in Oregon. The wagon train was attacked by bandits. She did not make it. I was not there to help her, and I have regretted it every day since. When I saw you this morning, looking so lost and afraid, I knew I could not walk away. I could not fail someone else who needed help." Rebecca felt her heart clench in her chest. "I am sorry about your sister." "Me too," Blake said. "But maybe I can help you, and maybe that will mean something." That night, Rebecca lay in the narrow bed in Mrs. Henderson's boarding house and stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep. Her mind kept replaying the events of the past 2 days, the violence and the loss, but also the unexpected kindness of a stranger, Blake Garrett. She repeated his name in her mind like a prayer, something solid to hold onto in the chaos. Over the following days, Rebecca began to piece her life back together, though it felt like trying to rebuild a house with broken boards. Mrs. Henderson let her stay at the boarding house in exchange for helping with chores, and Rebecca threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. She cooked and cleaned, changed linens and swept floors, and tried not to think about the fact that she was now completely alone in the world. Blake came by every day, ostensibly to check on her progress, but Rebecca suspected he just wanted to make sure she was all right. He brought her small gifts, practical things like a new pair of gloves or a warm shawl, and they would sit on the porch and talk while the sun set. Rebecca found herself looking forward to these visits, to the sound of his voice and the way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as if her words mattered. "Tell me about the ranch," she said one evening about a week after they had met. "The Double R, what is it like?" Blake leaned back in his chair, his long legs stretched out in front of him. "It is a good place," he said. "Belongs to a man named Richard Ross. He is fair, pays his hands well, and does not work them to death. We run about 2,000 head of cattle, mostly Herefords. The land is beautiful, rolling hills and good grazing. I have been there for 3 years now, and I cannot imagine working anywhere else." "What do you do there?" Rebecca asked, genuinely curious. "Bit of everything," Blake said. "Mending fences, herding cattle, breaking horses. Whatever needs doing. It is hard work, but honest work. I like being outside, like working with the animals. Makes more sense to me than people sometimes." Rebecca smiled at that. "I think I understand what you mean." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars come out. Rebecca had never felt so at ease with someone she barely knew, and it both comforted and frightened her. She had learned to be self-sufficient, to rely only on herself, and the idea of depending on someone else, of trusting them, felt dangerous. "What will you do now?" Blake asked gently. "Do you have family elsewhere, anyone you could go to?" Rebecca shook her head. "My parents were both only children. My grandparents are all dead. There is no one." "Then you will have to make a new life here," Blake said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. "How?" Rebecca asked, frustration creeping into her voice. "I have no money, no skills. I cannot stay at the boarding house forever. You can cook, can you not, and clean and sew, of course, but everyone can do those things." "Not everyone does them well," Blake pointed out. "Mrs. Henderson says you are a hard worker, that you have a good head on your shoulders. There are opportunities in Lewiston if you know where to look. The hotel needs help, and the new restaurant on Main Street is looking for someone to work in the kitchen." Rebecca considered this. It was true that she needed to find a way to support herself, and working was better than depending on charity. "I will ask around," she said. "See what is available." "Good," Blake said, and the approval in his voice warmed her. "You are strong, Rebecca, stronger than you know." She wanted to believe him, but the grief was still too fresh, the wounds too raw. At night, she still woke up screaming from nightmares, seeing her father's body fall, hearing her mother's cries. During the day, she moved through the world like a ghost, going through the motions but not really living. Blake seemed to sense this, and he made it his mission to draw her back into the world of the living. He took her on walks around town, introducing her to people and showing her the best places to buy supplies. He brought her to the church social, where the entire town gathered on Sunday afternoons to eat and gossip and enjoy each other's company. At first, Rebecca resisted, not wanting to face the pitying looks and whispered conversations, but Blake was persistent. "You cannot hide forever," he said gently. "These people want to help you, want to be your friends. Let them." So Rebecca went, and to her surprise, she found that Blake was right. The people of Lewiston were kind and welcoming, and while they were curious about the tragedy that had brought her to town, they were also respectful of her grief. Women brought her food and offered her work, and men tipped their hats and spoke to her with courtesy. Slowly, Rebecca began to feel like she might have a place here after all. She found work at the Silver Star restaurant, a new establishment run by a widow named Mrs. Calloway who needed help in the kitchen. The work was hard, long hours of chopping vegetables and washing dishes and preparing meals, but Rebecca did not mind. It kept her hands busy and her mind occupied, and Mrs. Calloway was a fair employer who paid her a decent wage. Rebecca saved every penny, determined to become independent, to never again be at the mercy of circumstances beyond her control. As the weeks turned into months, Rebecca found herself thinking more and more about Blake Garrett. He had become a constant presence in her life, someone she could depend on, someone who made her feel safe. He never pushed her, never demanded more than she was willing to give, but she could see the way he looked at her sometimes with a longing that made her heart race. It was late September when everything changed. Blake had ridden into town to pick up supplies for the ranch, and he stopped by the restaurant to see Rebecca, as he always did. But this time, there was something different in his manner, a tension that she could not quite place. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his hat in his hands, his blue eyes serious. "Of course," Rebecca said, wiping her hands on her apron. Mrs. Calloway gave her a knowing look and shooed her outside, telling her to take a break. Blake led her away from the main street, to a quiet spot near the river where the cottonwood trees provided shade. The water burbled over the rocks, a soothing sound that helped calm Rebecca's suddenly racing heart. She knew somehow that whatever Blake was about to say would change things between them. "I have been doing a lot of thinking," Blake said, not quite meeting her eyes. "About you, about us. And I realize that I am probably being foolish, that you have been through so much and the last thing you need is some cowboy declaring his feelings. But I cannot keep this to myself any longer." Rebecca's breath caught in her throat. "Blake." He held up a hand. "Let me finish, please. I know we have not known each other long, only a few months, but in that time, you have become the most important person in my life. I think about you all day long when I am working, and I look forward to seeing you more than anything else. You are strong and brave and beautiful, and I know I have no right to ask this, but I need you to know how I feel." "How do you feel?" Rebecca whispered, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Blake finally met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze took her breath away. "I am falling in love with you, Rebecca Turner. I think I started falling the moment I saw you that first morning, and I know it is too soon, and I know you might not feel the same way, but I had to tell you. I could not keep pretending that I just wanted to be your friend when what I really want is so much more." Rebecca stared at him, her mind reeling. She had known on some level that Blake cared for her, but hearing him say the words out loud was different. It made it real, made it something she had to confront. And the truth was, she felt the same way. Somewhere along the line, between the grief and the healing, she had fallen for this gentle cowboy who had shown her such kindness. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "You do not have to say anything," Blake said quickly. "I just needed you to know. I do not expect anything from you, Rebecca. I just want you to be happy." "What do you want, Blake?" Rebecca asked, her voice trembling. "Truly, what do you want from me?" Blake looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was soft but filled with conviction. "Just a chance to love you right. That is all I want. A chance to show you what it means to be cherished, to be protected, to be cared for. You have been through hell, and you deserve someone who will stand by you, who will be there for you no matter what. I want to be that person if you will let me." Rebecca felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time in months, they were not tears of grief. They were tears of relief, of joy, of the overwhelming realization that she was not alone, that someone saw her and valued her and wanted to build a life with her. "I am afraid," she confessed. "I am afraid of losing someone else I love. I am afraid of getting hurt again." Blake stepped closer, his hands gentle as he cupped her face, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I am afraid too," he said honestly. "But I would rather be afraid with you than safe without you. Life is uncertain, Rebecca. We both know that. But we can face it together, if you are willing to take that chance." Rebecca looked up into his eyes, those kind blue eyes that had been her anchor through the darkest time of her life, and she knew what her answer had to be. She had been surviving, but Blake was offering her the chance to live again, to love again, and she wanted that more than she had ever wanted anything. "Yes," she whispered. "I am willing to take that chance." Blake's face broke into a smile so wide and genuine that it transformed him, and before Rebecca could say anything else, he was kissing her. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Rebecca kissed him back with all the pent-up emotion she had been carrying. It was a kiss full of promise, full of hope, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I love you," Rebecca said, the words feeling right on her tongue. "I did not think I could feel this way again, but I do. I love you, Blake Garrett." Blake pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and Rebecca rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. They stood there by the river as the sun began to set, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of tragedy and chosen to build something beautiful together. The next few months passed in a blur of happiness. Blake courted Rebecca properly, taking her on picnics and walks, bringing her flowers and small gifts, and treating her with a respect and tenderness that made her fall more in love with him every day. They talked about everything, their childhoods and their dreams, their fears and their hopes for the future. Blake told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, about losing his parents to fever when he was 16 and making his way west with his sister. Rebecca shared memories of her own childhood, of her parents and the homestead, and found that talking about them helped ease the pain of their loss. In November, Blake asked Rebecca to marry him. It was a simple proposal, no grand gestures or elaborate plans. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching the first snow of the season fall. Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band, worn smooth with age. "This was my mother's ring," he said. "It is not much, but it is all I have to give you. Will you marry me, Rebecca? Will you be my wife and let me spend the rest of my life making you happy?" Rebecca did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in the small church in Lewiston on a bright December day, with half the town in attendance. Mrs. Henderson cried throughout the ceremony, and Mrs. Calloway provided the wedding cake, a beautiful confection that must have taken her days to prepare. Rebecca wore a simple white dress that some of the women in town had helped her sew, and Blake wore his best suit, his hair slicked back, and his face shining with happiness. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Blake kissed Rebecca with such enthusiasm that everyone laughed and applauded. They walked out of the church into a shower of rice and good wishes, and Rebecca felt like her heart might burst with joy. She had never imagined feeling this way again, had never thought she could be this happy after everything she had lost. Blake had arranged for them to rent a small house on the edge of town, a modest place with 2 bedrooms and a kitchen that needed work, but it was theirs. He carried Rebecca over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in the middle of the front room. "Welcome home, Mrs. Garrett," he said, his voice full of pride. "Mrs. Garrett," Rebecca repeated, testing out the name. "I like the sound of that." That night they consummated their marriage, and it was nothing like Rebecca had feared. Blake was gentle and patient, taking his time, making sure she was comfortable and cared for. It was intimate and beautiful, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, Rebecca felt a sense of peace she had not known in a long time. "I love you," Blake murmured against her hair. "I will love you until the day I die." "I love you too," Rebecca said, snuggling closer to him. "Thank you for giving me a chance to be happy again." "Thank you for taking that chance," Blake replied. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Blake continued to work at the Double R Ranch, leaving early in the morning and coming home in the evening, tired but satisfied. Rebecca kept her job at the restaurant, enjoying the work and the independence it gave her. They saved their money carefully, talking about the future, about maybe buying their own piece of land someday, starting their own ranch. The winter was harsh that year, with heavy snows and bitter cold, but Rebecca did not mind. She and Blake spent their evenings huddled by the fire, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. They made plans and dreamed dreams, and Rebecca felt herself healing in ways she had not thought possible. The nightmares came less frequently now, and when they did, Blake was there to hold her and comfort her until she fell back asleep. Spring came eventually, as it always does, bringing warmer weather and the promise of new beginnings. Rebecca discovered she was pregnant in April, and the news filled both her and Blake with a joy that was almost overwhelming. They had talked about having children, but Rebecca had not expected it to happen so soon. Blake was over the moon, already planning how he would teach their child to ride and rope, whether it was a boy or a girl. "I hope it is a boy," Blake said one evening, his hand resting on Rebecca's still flat stomach. "A son to carry on the family name." "It might be a girl," Rebecca pointed out, amused by his enthusiasm. "Then she will be the most spoiled, most loved girl in all of Idaho," Blake declared. "Either way, this child is going to know every day how much we wanted them, how much we love them." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. "I wish my parents could have met you, could have known about this baby. They would have been so happy." Blake pulled her close. "I think they know," he said softly. "And I think they would be proud of you, of how strong you have been, how you have built a new life for yourself." "We built it together," Rebecca corrected him. As the pregnancy progressed, Rebecca had to cut back on her hours at the restaurant, but Mrs. Calloway was understanding and flexible. Blake became even more protective, worrying about her constantly, making sure she was eating enough and resting enough. Rebecca found it both endearing and exasperating, but she loved him all the more for it. In the early summer, Richard Ross, the owner of the Double R Ranch, offered Blake a position as foreman. It was a significant promotion, one that came with a substantial raise in pay and more responsibility. Blake was hesitant at first, worried about the longer hours and the stress, especially with the baby coming, but Rebecca encouraged him to take it. "You have worked so hard for this," she said. "You deserve this opportunity. We will figure out the rest." Blake accepted the position, and true to Rebecca's words, they figured it out. Blake hired on some new hands and delegated responsibilities, and while the work was demanding, he thrived in the role. He had a natural way with men and animals alike, and the ranch prospered under his leadership. Rebecca gave birth to their first child in late October of 1879, a healthy baby boy with Blake's blue eyes and Rebecca's auburn hair. They named him James, after Blake's father, and from the moment Rebecca held him in her arms, she knew that her life was complete. Blake was a devoted father, spending every spare moment with his son, singing to him and rocking him to sleep and changing his diapers without complaint. "I never knew I could love someone this much," Blake said one night, watching James sleep in his cradle. "It is almost frightening how much I love him, how much I love you." "I know," Rebecca said, leaning against him. "But it is a good kind of frightening, is it not?" "The best kind," Blake agreed. The years that followed were good ones. They had their struggles, as all couples do. Money was sometimes tight, and there were disagreements and frustrations, but they worked through them together. Blake continued to advance at the Double R, eventually becoming a partner in the ranch, a position that came with a share of the profits and real security for their growing family. Rebecca had two more children, a daughter named Emily in 1882 and another son, Thomas, in 1884. The little house on the edge of town became too small, and they moved to a larger home on the ranch property, a beautiful house with a wide porch and a view of the rolling hills. Rebecca finally gave up her job at the restaurant to focus on raising their children, though she sometimes missed the work and the independence it had given her. Life was busy and full, and Rebecca often thought back to that terrible morning when she had stumbled into Lewiston, broken and lost. She thought about Blake finding her, helping her, giving her a reason to keep going. She thought about the question she had asked him, what he wanted from her, and his answer that had changed everything. Just a chance to love you right. He had kept that promise every single day since, in ways big and small. He loved her through the good times and the bad, through sickness and health, through joy and sorrow. He was her partner, her best friend, the father of her children, and the love of her life. The children grew quickly, as children do. James was a serious boy, thoughtful and hardworking like his father, with a love for the land and the animals. Emily was bright and curious, always asking questions and exploring the world around her. Thomas was the baby, sweet and affectionate, with a mischievous streak that kept Rebecca on her toes. Blake taught all three of them to ride as soon as they were old enough to sit a horse, and they spent their days roaming the ranch, helping with chores and learning the business. Rebecca taught them to read and write, using the books she borrowed from the lending library in town, and made sure they understood the value of education. In the summer of 1886, when James was 6 and Emily was 4 and Thomas was 2, the family took a trip to Boise to visit the state fair. It was a grand adventure, the children's first time traveling beyond Lewiston, and they were wide-eyed with excitement. They saw all sorts of exhibits and demonstrations, ate too much candy, and watched the horse races with fascination. On the last day of the fair, Blake bought Rebecca a beautiful silver locket from one of the vendors. Inside, he had placed tiny photographs of their 3 children, carefully cut to fit. "So you can carry them with you always," he said, fastening it around her neck. Rebecca touched the locket, feeling the weight of it against her chest, and felt tears spring to her eyes. "It is beautiful, thank you." "Not as beautiful as you," Blake said, and even after all these years the compliment made her blush. That night, after the children were asleep in the hotel room, Blake and Rebecca sat on the balcony, looking out at the city lights. It was a rare moment of quiet, just the two of them, and Rebecca savored it. "You ever think about that first day we met?" she asked. "All the time," Blake said. "I thank God every day that I was the one who found you, that I got the chance to know you, to love you." "I was so lost back then," Rebecca said softly. "I did not think I would ever be happy again." "And now?" Blake asked, taking her hand. "Now I am happier than I ever imagined possible," Rebecca said honestly. "You gave me a life I did not think I could have. You gave me a family, a home, a reason to wake up every morning with a smile on my face." Blake raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "You gave me the same things. Before I met you, I was just drifting, going through the motions. You gave me purpose, gave me something to work for, someone to build a future with." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, holding hands and watching the stars come out. Rebecca thought about all the years they had been together, all the memories they had made, and all the years still to come. Their life was not perfect, but it was good, and it was theirs. The next decade brought more changes and challenges. The ranch continued to prosper, and Blake's reputation as a skilled cattleman spread throughout Idaho. They bought more land, expanded the herd, and hired on more hands. Blake was respected in the community, known as a fair employer and an honest businessman. Rebecca became involved in the church and the school, organizing fundraisers and helping new families settle in the area. James grew into a tall, strong young man, working alongside his father on the ranch and showing a natural aptitude for the business. Emily developed a love of learning and talked about becoming a teacher someday. Thomas was the charmer, popular with everyone he met, with dreams of seeing the world beyond Idaho. In 1892, tragedy struck when Richard Ross, Blake's mentor and partner, died suddenly of a heart attack. He left his share of the ranch to Blake in his will, recognizing all the years of hard work and dedication. Blake was devastated by the loss of his friend, but he was also determined to honor Richard's memory by continuing to run the ranch with the same integrity and vision. The responsibility weighed heavily on Blake, and there were nights when he came home exhausted and discouraged, worried about making the right decisions, about providing for all the families who depended on the ranch for their livelihood. But Rebecca was always there, his steady support, reminding him of how far they had come and how much they had achieved together. "You are not alone in this," she told him one particularly difficult night. "We are partners, remember? We face everything together." Blake pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I do not know what I would do without you." "Good thing you will never have to find out," Rebecca said, kissing him softly. As the children entered their teenage years, Rebecca found herself reflecting more and more on her own youth, on the girl she had been before tragedy had changed her life forever. She thought about her parents sometimes, about the life they had tried to build on that small homestead. She wondered what they would think of the woman she had become, of the family she had created. She visited their graves once, making the journey to the small cemetery near where the homestead had been. Blake came with her, holding her hand as she stood before the simple markers he had placed there all those years ago. She told them about James and Emily and Thomas, about the ranch and the life she had built. She told them about Blake and how he had saved her in more ways than one. "I hope you are proud of me," she whispered, laying flowers on the graves. "I hope you know that I think of you every day, that I have tried to live a life you would be proud of." Blake squeezed her hand. "They would be proud," he said firmly. "How could they not be?" On the ride back to the ranch, Rebecca felt a sense of peace settle over her. She had carried her grief for so long, but standing there at her parents' graves, she had felt their love surrounding her, had felt their approval. It was time to let go of the guilt she had carried for surviving when they had not, time to fully embrace the life she had been given. That year, for her 36th birthday, Blake threw Rebecca a surprise party, inviting all their friends and neighbors. The house was full of laughter and music, and Rebecca felt overwhelmed by the love and warmth surrounding her. She looked around at all the people who had become her family, at her children dancing and playing, at Blake watching her with that same look of adoration he had worn on their wedding day, and she felt truly blessed. Late in the evening, after most of the guests had gone home, Blake found Rebecca standing on the porch, looking out at the ranch spread before them. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him, content. "Happy birthday," he murmured into her hair. "It has been a perfect day," Rebecca said. "Thank you." "I wanted to do something special for you," Blake said. "You do so much for everyone else, for me and the children and everyone in this community. I wanted you to feel appreciated." "I always feel appreciated," Rebecca assured him. "You make sure of that every single day." Blake was quiet for a moment, and Rebecca could feel him gathering his thoughts. "I was thinking about something today," he finally said. "About that morning we met when you asked me what I wanted." "I remember," Rebecca said softly. "I told you I just wanted a chance to love you right," Blake continued. "And I have spent every day since trying to do that. But Rebecca, you have loved me right too. You have given me a life beyond my wildest dreams, a family, a home, a reason to be better than I ever thought I could be. I just want you to know that. I want you to know how much you mean to me, how grateful I am for every single day we have together." Rebecca turned in his arms so she could see his face. There were tears in his eyes, and she reached up to brush them away gently. "We saved each other," she said. "That is what we did. You gave me a reason to live again, and I gave you someone to love. We built this life together, brick by brick, day by day, and I would not change a single moment of it." Blake kissed her then, a deep, passionate kiss that reminded Rebecca of all the reasons she had fallen in love with him in the first place. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathless. "I love you, Rebecca Garrett," Blake said, "more than words can say." "I love you too," Rebecca whispered, "always and forever." The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. James married a sweet girl named Sarah from a neighboring ranch and gave Blake and Rebecca their first grandchild, a beautiful baby girl they named Rose. Emily went to school in Boise to become a teacher, just as she had always dreamed. Thomas decided to stay on the ranch, discovering a talent for training horses that made him invaluable to the operation. Blake's hair turned gray at the temples, and Rebecca found laugh lines deepening around her eyes, but they wore their age well. They had earned every line, every gray hair, through years of hard work and love and commitment to each other and their family. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Blake took Rebecca back to the spot by the river where he had first told her he loved her. The cottonwood trees were bigger now, their branches providing deep shade, but the river still burbled over the rocks just as it had all those years ago. "I wanted to come back here," Blake said, holding Rebecca's hand as they stood on the bank. "This is where everything changed for us, where we went from being friends to something more." "I remember how terrified I was," Rebecca said. "How afraid I was to let myself love you, to let myself be vulnerable again. And I was so afraid you would say no, that you would tell me you did not feel the same way," Blake said. "But you took that chance. You let me love you." "Best decision I ever made," Rebecca said, smiling up at him. Blake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. "I know we already did the whole wedding ring thing, but I wanted to give you something to mark this milestone. 20 years, Rebecca. 20 years of marriage, of partnership, of love. Rebecca opened the box to find a delicate gold bracelet, engraved with their wedding date and the names of their 3 children. It was beautiful and thoughtful, and it brought tears to her eyes. "Blake, it is perfect," she said as he fastened it around her wrist. "You are perfect," Blake said. "And I am the luckiest man alive to have you as my wife." They stood there by the river, holding each other, and Rebecca thought about all they had been through together. The grief and the joy, the struggles and the triumphs, the ordinary days and the extraordinary moments. They had built a good life, a life worth living, and they had done it together. As they grew older, Blake and Rebecca began to think about the legacy they would leave behind. The ranch was thriving, and James was ready to take over the day-to-day operations, freeing Blake to step back and enjoy his grandchildren. Emily returned to Lewiston after finishing school and opened a small schoolhouse, bringing education to children whose families could not afford to send them to the larger schools in Boise. Thomas married a girl from town and started his own horse breeding operation on a corner of the ranch. Rebecca spent her days helping with the grandchildren, teaching them to read and bake and garden, passing on the skills and values that were important to her. She volunteered at the church and organized quilting circles, and made sure that any new families moving into the area felt welcome and supported, remembering how lost she had felt when she first arrived in Lewiston. One evening in the summer of 1902, Blake and Rebecca sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and red. They were in their 60s now, slowing down but still active, still engaged in life. Their grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the warm breeze, and Rebecca felt a deep sense of contentment. "We did all right, did we not?" Blake said, his hand finding hers. "We did better than all right," Rebecca said. "We did wonderfully." "I was thinking about something the other day," Blake said. "About that question you asked me all those years ago, what I wanted from you." "And what did you conclude?" Rebecca asked, amused. "That I got so much more than I ever asked for," Blake said. "I wanted a chance to love you right, and you gave me that. But you also gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to get up every morning. You gave me a life worth living." Rebecca leaned her head on his shoulder. "You gave me the same things. You saved my life, Blake. Not just physically, but in every way that matters. You gave me hope when I had none, love when I thought I would never feel it again, a future when I thought mine was over." "We saved each other," Blake said, echoing the words she had spoken so many years before. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Rebecca thought about the girl she had been at 22, stumbling into Lewiston with blood on her hands and despair in her heart. She thought about the cowboy who had helped her, who had seen past her pain to the person she could become. She thought about all the years in between, the love and the laughter and the life they had built together. "I would do it all again," she said suddenly. "Every moment, every struggle, every joy. I would do it all again, exactly the same way, as long as it meant ending up here with you." Blake turned to look at her, his blue eyes still as bright and kind as they had been that first morning. "So would I," he said. Without hesitation, without question. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Rebecca Turner Garrett." "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me," Rebecca said, kissing him softly. As the stars began to come out, one by one, Rebecca felt a profound sense of gratitude for the life she had been given. It had not always been easy, and there had been moments of great pain and loss, but there had also been moments of transcendent joy and love. And through it all, Blake had been there, her constant companion, her truest friend, the love of her life. They had taken a chance on each other all those years ago, 2 broken people reaching out in the darkness, and they had created something beautiful. They had built a family, a legacy, a love that would endure long after they were gone. Their children and grandchildren would carry on, would tell their story, would remember the cowboy and the girl who had found each other in the Wild West and chosen love over fear. That night, as Rebecca lay in bed beside Blake, listening to his steady breathing, she felt completely at peace. She had lived a full life, a good life, a life she was proud of. And it had all started with a simple question and an even simpler answer. She had asked the cowboy what he wanted. He had replied, just a chance to love her right, and he had done exactly that every single day for the rest of their lives. The seasons continued their eternal cycle, and Blake and Rebecca grew older together, their love deepening with each passing year. They celebrated 50 years of marriage in 1928, surrounded by their children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren. The party was held at the ranch, which was now run entirely by James and his sons, and people came from all over Idaho to honor the couple who had become legendary in the community. Blake and Rebecca sat in chairs of honor on the porch, holding hands and smiling at everyone who came to offer their congratulations. They were in their 70s now, their bodies slower but their minds still sharp, their love for each other undimmed by time. 50 years, Blake said wonderingly. How did we get so lucky? It was not luck, Rebecca said. It was choice. Every day we chose each other, chose to work through the hard times, chose to celebrate the good times. That is what made the difference. Blake raised her hand to his lips and kissed it, just as he had done countless times over the years. You are still the most beautiful woman I have ever seen. Rebecca laughed. You need spectacles, old man. My eyes are fine, Blake insisted, and so are you. As the sun set on their golden anniversary celebration, Rebecca looked around at all the people they had touched over the years, all the lives they had influenced. She saw the ranch hands who had worked for Blake and learned from his fairness and integrity. She saw the students Emily had taught, now grown with children of their own. She saw the horses Thomas had trained, now the foundation of breeding programs across the state. She saw their grandchildren and great-grandchildren carrying on the family name and the family values. She thought about the legacy they were leaving, not just in terms of property or money, but in terms of love and kindness and community. They had shown people that it was possible to overcome tragedy, to build a good life from the ashes of loss, to choose love even when it seemed impossible. Blake and Rebecca lived several more good years together, each day a gift they did not take for granted. They took walks around the ranch, slowly now but still together. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sunset and talking about their lives. They held their great-grandchildren and told them stories about the old days, about how the West used to be. Blake passed away peacefully in his sleep in the spring of 1932, at the age of 78. Rebecca was beside him when he took his last breath, holding his hand and whispering that she loved him. The grief was profound, a loss so deep it felt like a physical wound, but Rebecca also felt grateful. They had been given 54 years together, far more than many couples received, and they had made the most of every single day. At Blake's funeral, Rebecca stood before the assembled crowd and spoke about the man she had loved for more than half a century. Blake Garrett was the best man I ever knew, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. He was kind and fair and hardworking. He was a devoted husband, a loving father, a doting grandfather. He built a life worth living, and he shared that life with me. I asked him once what he wanted from me, and he said just a chance to love me right. He kept that promise every day until his last. I will miss him for the rest of my life, but I will also be eternally grateful that I got to love him and be loved by him. Rebecca lived for another 5 years, staying active and involved in the community despite her advanced age. She spent her days with her children and grandchildren, passing on family stories and recipes and wisdom. She never remarried, never even considered it. Blake had been the love of her life, and she was content to carry his memory with her until the day she joined him. She passed away quietly in the summer of 1937, at the age of 81. Her family found her in the garden she had tended for so many years, a peaceful expression on her face. They buried her beside Blake, in the cemetery overlooking the ranch they had built together. On her headstone, beneath her name and dates, they inscribed the words, "Beloved wife, mother, grandmother, she took a chance on love and lived a life worth living." The ranch continued to prosper under James and his sons, and then under his grandsons. The house Blake and Rebecca had built was maintained lovingly, becoming a gathering place for the family for generations to come. The story of how they met, of the question Rebecca asked and Blake's answer, became family legend, told and retold to children and grandchildren who would never meet them but who carried their legacy forward. In Lewiston, a memorial plaque was placed in the town square, honoring Blake Garrett for his contributions to the community and his role in making the town a welcoming place for those in need. Every year on their wedding anniversary, someone from the family would place flowers at the memorial, remembering the cowboy who had helped a desperate young woman and the love story that had resulted. And so their story became part of the fabric of Idaho history, a testament to the power of kindness and love in the harsh landscape of the Wild West. It was a story about second chances and the courage to reach for happiness even in the face of terrible loss. It was a story about two people who found each other when they needed each other most and chose to build a life together, brick by brick, day by day. It was, quite simply, a love story for the ages. The question Rebecca had asked that day by the river had been born of fear and uncertainty, the question of a woman who had learned that nothing came without a price. "What do you want from me?" She had needed to know, needed to understand what Blake expected in return for his kindness. And Blake's answer had been perfect in its simplicity. Just a chance to love you right. He had not asked for anything except the opportunity to show her what real love looked like, what it meant to be cherished and valued and protected. And in giving him that chance, Rebecca had found her own chance at happiness, at a life she had not dared to dream of in those dark days after her parents' death. Their descendants would go on to do great things. James's line would produce doctors and lawyers and teachers, people who contributed to their communities and made the world a better place. Emily's students would spread across the West, carrying her lessons with them. Thomas's horses would become legendary, sought after by ranchers from California to Montana. But the greatest legacy Blake and Rebecca left was simpler than any of that. It was the legacy of showing people that love was worth fighting for, that kindness mattered, that choosing to help someone in need could change not just their life but your own. It was the legacy of demonstrating that the Wild West, for all its harshness and violence, could also be a place where love bloomed and families thrived, and second chances were possible. Every time a member of their family helped a stranger, they were honoring Blake's memory. Every time they chose compassion over indifference, they were honoring Rebecca's courage. The love story that had begun on a dusty street in Lewiston in 1878 rippled outward through time, touching lives that Blake and Rebecca would never know about but whose existence was shaped by the choices they had made. And if you were to visit Lewiston today, you would still find descendants of Blake and Rebecca Garrett living in the area, still working the land, still telling the story of their remarkable ancestors. You would find their names on buildings and scholarships and community programs. You would find their values woven into the very fabric of the community they helped build. But most importantly, you would find their love story still being told, still inspiring people to take chances on love, to reach out to those in need, to believe that even in the darkest moments, hope is possible. You would find proof that two people, one cowboy and one heartbroken young woman, had created something that transcended their own lives, something that would endure as long as there were people who believed in the power of love. That was the real legacy of Blake and Rebecca Garrett. Not the land or the money or the family name, though those things mattered. The real legacy was the love they had shared and the example they had set, showing generation after generation that when someone asks what you want, sometimes the bravest answer, the truest answer, the best answer is simply this: just a chance to love you right. And if you are given that chance, if you are brave enough to take it and wise enough to honor it, you can build a life worth living, a love worth having, and a legacy worth leaving. That is what Blake and Rebecca had done, and that is why their story endures, a beacon of hope and love in the Wild West and beyond, forever and always.